Miniature painting is a hobby that gets expensive real quick. But what if you aren't sure this hobby's for you? What if you just want to dip your toe in the water? What is the absolute minimum you need to get your first miniature painted? I've got 10 things you need, the reasons you need them, and about how much they cost. Number 10 might surprise you. And to show you how to use all these tools, I'm going to paint a Tyranid from Warhammer 40k Space Marine, the board game. Not a sponsor. Well, let's get into it. Number 1 is a good light source. I think this sometimes gets overlooked by beginners. Having a good white light source is crucial for getting that perfect lighting on that model. Plus, it takes a ton of strain off of your eyes. If you live in a glass house, you're set. Natural light is great and it's free. For everyone else, a cheap desk lamp or LED light will be perfect. Just make sure it's white light. If it's not white light, as you're painting the model, you'll be under the impression that you have the right colors on and they look perfect. But as soon as you turn that lamp off, you're going to regret everything because it's going to be too red or too blue or not blue enough or not red enough. Just make sure it's a white balanced light so that all the colors are exactly as you see them. It doesn't need to be fancy, you just need a good light source. Number 2, sprue cutters. Sprue cutters do exactly that. They cut sprues. And if you're getting something in a box like this, you're gonna need it. Get one with a small profile and a sharp tip. Not this, and not this. This is what you're looking for. Number 3, a hobby knife. A hobby knife is my favorite tool to shave the mold lines off of those mini pieces you just clipped off the sprue. It can also be used for various other things, whether it be terrain or making extra battle damage. I mean, it's a hobby knife. You'll use it. And they're really cheap, which is pretty cool. I managed to find a kit on Amazon that sells both the sprue cutters and the hobby knife for relatively cheap, so jump on that. Number 4, plastic glue. Plastic glue is used to bond your pieces together. When you put it on, it slightly melts the plastic so that when you push the pieces together and it dries or cures, it will become one solid piece and you won't have to worry about it falling apart or having to re-glue it because it just melts together. I use Citadel's plastic glue. Some people don't like it. I really love it. And one bottle, it looks pretty small, but I've used one bottle for over 100 miniatures before I needed to get a new one, so look into it. Others swear Bitania is extra thin, so get that one if it's more available to you. Number 5, for the miniature painting hobby, paints. This should be obvious. This is where we get unavoidably expensive. Could you get the cheapest paints from Walmart? And could you paint your miniature with it? Yes. I did. Should you? Like I did? No, I don't recommend it. Let's start from the beginning. When you're starting out, you want acrylic paints. Ones sold by Citadel, Army Painter, Vallejo, and Monument Hobbies. You'll see beautiful models that use inks and oils to get some really, really awesome effects. But I'd hold off on that for now. Just stick with the acrylics. And you using the acrylics will help you hone your skills so that you'll be better equipped to use the oils and the inks later in your more advanced projects. You're gonna need some primer. To make your paint stick to the model, primer's a must. Use primer specifically made for miniature models. When I first started out, I just went to the store, and here in America, we've got a few brands, but one of them is Rust-Oleum. I grabbed a Rust-Oleum primer, and I thought I was good to go. It was like $4 or $5, really cheap. Then I used it on my model. It came out too fast, too thick, and it just gunked up the whole thing. It covered up all the details. It was bad. It was a bad day. I know that model primers are a lot more expensive, but this is because they're specifically designed to provide soft, thin layers of paint to cover every part of the miniature without obscuring the details. For colors, I'm going to assume that you're probably going to follow some tutorial out there for the model that you're getting, so I'm not going to go into that. But if you want a video on colors and how I choose colors based on my custom color schemes, let me know in the comments. So what brand of paint should you get? Honestly, whatever's local. I would kill for more Vallejo paints, but they are super hard to get in my area. So I'm mostly a Citadel and Army Painter guy. Everyone has different opinions on which brand is best, which colors are best, yada, yada, yada. But honestly, having a mixture of all the brands has produced the best models for me. Paint quality varies from brand to brand, from color to color. And as you paint and get better, you're gonna know which paints are the best and which paints are the worst. If you guys want to know why Corax White is the worst, let me know in the comments. I'll make a video all about my hatred for Corax White. Number 6, we get into brushes. Also very important in a painting hobby. Cheap dollar store brushes are going to be your best friend. You're going to use these things for dry brushing, for basing, for just about everything other than high details. Speaking of details, if you want a brush made for precision, this will probably last you 1, maybe 2 minis. These things are they're made to look like they're sharp and pointy from the factory, but as soon as you get these things wet and as soon as you use them for one model, they're going to unfurl and they're going to turn into, gosh, where's my first one? A disaster. It's going to turn to this. You don't want that. So if you're painting a miniature with lots of details, I'd recommend get one good brush, like this one. Look for a fine tipped brush made from a natural hair, usually size 0, 1, or 2. I like to stick in size 1 or 2. It took me forever to get a good brush. I told myself, you don't need those expensive brushes. Your brushes you got now are just fine for detail. So when I was gifted a good brush, I gave it a whirl. I had finished literally one detail when I sat back and thought, I hate myself. All those times where I screwed up, I thought it was just a skill issue. But it turns out it was a skill issue, but it was also a tool issue. If you have the wrong tool for the job, it's not gonna look good. And those sharp, good, high quality brushes are perfect for those small details in your miniatures. Do you need it? No. To have a good time? I'd say yes. Get one good brush, and then you can use your crappy dollar store brushes for just about everything else. Number 7, a water cup. You will need a cup of water to wash your brushes and thin your paints. A cup is one item on this list that I know you already have. Grab that ugly mug you got as your Christmas bonus and put it on the table as your new miniature painting paint mug. Also, a little advice. If you drink from mugs often and you plan on drinking it while painting, probably don't use a mug for your paint cup. You might end up drinking it, unless you're down with that. Then you do you. Number 8, a paint palette. So it can be a dry palette or a wet palette. Wet palettes like this one are awesome, but you don't need it. Many professionals use a dry palette called a glass palette. If you can spare a glass cooking dish, that is the cheapest high quality glass palette I can think of. If you or your significant other is uncomfortable with doing something like that, then get one of the paper palettes. I picked this thing up from my local hobby store and I still use it sometimes for my oils and inks. It keeps your paints from drying out. It's a lot better than using newspaper for your paints. Don't do that. Number 9, a hobby stand. Throughout this video, you've probably noticed my little wooden miniature holder here. It's a meeple thing that I got from the same hobby store I got my paper from. And all I've done with this is I've taken some extra strength double-sided tape and just slapped it on this end, stuck my mini on it, and it's been working great for the past 5 years. A hobby stand can be one of those fancy ones from GW, but it doesn't really need to be. Other creators like Miniac are using simple wooden dowels cut down and also cork from a wine bottle. Choose whatever works best for you, but you don't need to spend a lot of money on this. If you can grip it, you can stick it to it. What am I saying? That was a bad line. The last thing, but certainly not the least, a mini. I know. Obviously, you need a mini to paint a miniature. But this is actually a lot more important than you think it is. You need to pick a miniature with defined details. Let me explain. When you're starting out, you'll probably want to find the cheapest miniature that you can find. Probably something for Dungeons and Dragons that's around $5. Problem is that with a lot of these smaller models, their details are not defined enough. They don't have high detail. Usually with a smaller price tag, you get less detail, which makes sense. But for a beginner, detail isn't just a great thing to have, but it's also essential for these beginner techniques. Every beginner starts out using washes on their miniatures. It's the easiest way to add a full range of depth with the minimum amount of work. You may have already watched 2 or 3 tutorials where somebody uses a wash or an oil. Probably Nuln oil. Washes are super thin so that they leave the high areas light and they sink into the recesses, leaving them dark. So it gives the impression that the model is being shadowed by the sunlight. That's not really accurate with washes, but we can get into that in a different video. Models with poorly defined details are more smooth in their transitions. They don't do a good job defining areas, particularly on the face or where the bicep transitions to the tricep and stuff like that. When you use a wash without those defining details, it just kind of spreads out. Like if you poured it onto the table, it just does whatever it wants. It doesn't have anywhere to seep into, doesn't have anything to run away from, to reveal like the high areas. So when you go to paint those details, it's going to be extremely difficult to make out the exact location of where those details are, especially for a beginner who doesn't have hours and hours of practicing their brush control. So to repeat myself, pick a miniature with defined details. This model here from Games Workshop, Castellan Crow, I love this model. I love him so much that I'm afraid to paint him because I don't want to mess him up. But I gotta be brave and do it. That video will come eventually. Yeah, this model has great details. I've seen some of those cheap D&D models around $5 that have impressive defined details for their price range. So it's definitely possible to get something cheaper. But if you're starting out in something like Warhammer or Star Wars Legion, you're probably gonna get a lot better molds. So you're good. That's it. That's the absolute minimum you need to prep and paint your very first Warhammer model. Remember, it's not about having the fanciest equipment or the prettiest tools or the best brushes. It's about having fun. And if you have these tools on this list, you're going to paint a miniature, not regret it, and I think you'll have fun. If you're one of those watchers out there who has experience and you know of something cheaper, better, or maybe you think my list is too long, put it in the comments. Share your wisdom, and I'll be happy to participate in discussions. Now, go out there, grab a miniature, paint your minis.